One woman, a respected attorney, finds herself handcuffed and humiliated by the very system she's fought for, only to face her accusers again, this time with the power to deliver justice. This is a story of resilience, accountability, and a twist of fate you won't believe. On a radiant afternoon in Fort Collins, Colorado, the local park buzzed with life. Laughter from children echoed across the green, runners moved rhythmically along the winding paths, and families savored their lunches beneath the sprawling branches of ancient oaks. In the midst of this lively yet tranquil setting, a black woman perched on a bench by the pond, engrossed in a hefty novel balanced on her knees. Her name was Camille, a distinguished lawyer stealing a fleeting break from her rigorous professional life. She was lost in the pages when the shrill squeal of brakes shattered her focus. A police car rolled to a stop at the edge of the sidewalk, drawing curious glances from a handful of bystanders. Two officers emerged, their faces set in hard lines, exuding an air of command. Their gazes zeroed in on Camille, who sat solitary in the area. "Excuse me, ma'am, could we have a word?" one officer called, his tone laced with distrust rather than courtesy. Camille looked up from her book, her poise unshaken. "Certainly," she responded, gently shutting the novel. The other officer approached, his voice sharp and abrupt. "We received a report of questionable behavior nearby. Care to explain what you're up to?" Camille's brow furrowed in confusion. "Questionable behavior? I'm simply reading here." She lifted the book slightly, as if to underscore her statement, but the officer's intense stares didn't soften. "We'll need to see your identification," the first officer stated firmly. Her heartbeat quickened, yet she maintained her calm. "Can you tell me why this is necessary?" "Just standard procedure," the second officer replied, though his inflection suggested otherwise. A small group of onlookers had begun to gather, their whispers filling the air. Some watched with intrigue while others exchanged uneasy looks, sensing the uneven dynamic unfolding. Camille let out a quiet breath and reached into her purse, retrieving her wallet. She handed over her driver's license, and one officer examined it with an almost theatrical thoroughness. "Camille Johnson," he read out loud, his tone tinged with mockery. "So, what brings you here, Miss Johnson?" Camille drew a slow breath, striving to hold her composure. "I'm a resident of this city. I came to relax in the park. Is that an issue?" The officer's mouth pressed into a thin line. "That remains to be seen." He returned her ID, but instead of leaving, the pair lingered, firing off questions that felt more like a cross-examination than a casual check. "You always lug a book like that around?" one officer remarked with a smirk. "Here by yourself or expecting company?" the other added, his hand deliberately resting on his duty belt. Camille had navigated countless high-stakes encounters in legal battles, but this felt distinct. The imbalance of power was palpable, and their words carried a familiar, cutting undertone. Still, she measured her response carefully. "I won't answer further unless you clarify what I'm being accused of," she stated with resolve. Her defiance seemed to spark a reaction. The first officer stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Don't play clever with us," he barked. "We're just doing our duty." "And I understand the law," Camille countered, her tone unwavering. "I'm not violating it by sitting in a public space." But logic wasn't their priority. The first officer grabbed her arm. "You're resisting," he declared despite her stillness. "What's going on?" she cried, caught off guard. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and a man in the group pulled out his phone to film. "Stop resisting," the officer shouted again, his voice amplified as if addressing the spectators. Camille's pulse pounded as the cold bite of handcuffs clamped around her wrists. She fought to stay composed, though anger and shame surged within her. The officers escorted her toward their vehicle, brushing off the crowd's queries. Camille glanced back, her eyes meeting those of a young woman recording with her phone. In that brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a quiet call to capture the wrong unfolding. As the car door slammed shut, Camille felt certain this was not the end, but the opening chapter of a larger story. Trapped in the narrow confines of the police cruiser's back seat, Camille's thoughts churned wildly. For years, she had championed her clients' causes, fought for fairness, and maneuvered through the complexities of the legal world. Now she found herself on the opposite side of that system. The sheer ridiculousness of her predicament hit her hard, but it carried no amusement, only a deep, smoldering rage. The drive to the precinct was oppressively quiet. broken only by the intermittent static of the radio. Camille gazed out the window, her face reflected faintly against the blur of passing streets. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, a constant nagging pain. At the station, the ordeal intensified. The booking procedure was intrusive and degrading, crafted to erode her sense of self. They took her fingerprints, snapped her mugshot, and ushered her into a cramped holding cell where harsh fluorescent lights hummed incessantly. "Make yourself comfortable," one officer sneered as he locked the door. Camille settled onto the icy bench, her fingers tightly interlocked. Her mind replayed the park incident relentlessly. How had a serene moment unraveled into this nightmare? The answer was stark and painful: bias. Time dragged on, hours slipping by without a word. Finally, a young officer appeared, clutching a clipboard. "Miss Johnson, you're facing charges of resisting arrest and interfering with an officer's duties," he stated in a monotone. "Based on what?" Camille shot back, her tone sharper than she'd meant. "That's for the courtroom," he said curtly, turning on his heel. She let out a slow breath, willing herself to think tactically. The accusations were weak and she knew it, but she also understood the battle ahead would be grueling. Cases like hers seldom came easy. Eventually, bail secured her release. Stepping out of the station, the crisp night air washed over her, a sharp relief from the stifling environment within. She spotted Marissa, her friend and colleague, waiting anxiously by the curb. "Camille," Marissa hurried forward, her expression a blend of worry and solace. "Are you all right?" Camille gave a small nod, though a faint tremble betrayed her. "I'm okay," she said, the word ringing empty. As they drove off, Marissa stole glances at her, waiting for her to open up. At last, Camille spoke, her voice resolute. "I'm not letting this go, Marissa, not this time." Marissa's hands tightened on the wheel. "What's your plan?" "I'm done with this happening over and over," Camille answered. "I have the skills, the expertise, and the means to push back, and I'm going to." That night, Camille sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of legal pads and open texts. She poured herself into drafting a civil rights lawsuit against the officers and their department, her hands trembling. Not from fear, but from a fierce, unyielding resolve. As days stretched into weeks, support from the community swelled. The video of her arrest, captured by the young woman at the park, had exploded online. Messages poured in from people of all backgrounds, sharing their own encounters with injustice. Each email, call, and comment bolstered Camille's determination. This wasn't just her fight. It was for everyone who had been silenced, shamed, or overlooked. Yet even as she geared up for the legal showdown, she couldn't foresee the twist that justice would soon deliver. The weeks after her arrest were a storm of emotions and unceasing effort. Her law firm initially wavered, concerned that her high-profile case might eclipse their polished image. Camille stood her ground, explaining with quiet conviction that this wasn't merely about her, it was about establishing a standard. The viral video had done more than share her story. It had ignited discussions far beyond the city. The footage of Camille, composed yet unyielding as the officers dragged her away, became an emblem of defiance against unfair treatment. Journalists started reaching out, seeking interviews, but Camille declined every request. She wasn't chasing publicity. Her focus was razor-sharp, constructing a case to hold the officers accountable and reveal the deep-rooted flaws that enabled such conduct. In the stillness of night, when the world hushed, the weight of her situation settled heavily. She relived the arrest, the officers' scornful tones, the cold grip of the cuffs, the crowd's hushed whispers. She pondered how quickly things could have escalated further. The thought twisted her gut, but it also stoked her drive. One evening, as she pored over her notes, Marissa dropped by with takeout. Camille barely glanced up from her screen as Marissa set the food down. "You've been glued to that for hours," Marissa said softly. "I don't have a choice," Camille replied, her voice steady. Marissa took a seat across from her, studying her closely. "This is more than just a lawsuit, isn't it? People are counting on you now." Camille shut her laptop, meeting her friend's eyes. "I know," she said firmly. "That's exactly why I can't let this fail." Camille's groundwork was thorough and unrelenting. She delved into past cases, extracting legal precedents and compiling evidence to unravel the officers' defenses. She rallied a group of dedicated colleagues, forming a legal team united by a shared commitment to fairness. Yet her efforts extended beyond the confines of the courtroom. Camille immersed herself in the community, attending public forums, lending an ear to those who had endured similar wrongs, and delivering a speech at a nearby college on the necessity of holding power to account. One day, as she headed to her car after a community meeting, a woman approached her tentatively. "Are you Miss Johnson?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Yes," Camille replied. The woman's eyes glistened as she spoke. "I just need to thank you," she said, her words breaking with emotion, "for challenging them, for fighting for people like me." Camille's chest tightened, but she offered a gentle smile. "I'm only doing what I can." The community's backing was both a blessing and a burden. It fueled her drive but also intensified the weight of expectation. She couldn't afford to falter. Then one morning her lawyer called with an update. The officers she was suing had submitted a motion to dismiss her case. Camille wasn't surprised. It was a predictable tactic to stall proceedings. But as her lawyer outlined the next steps, he paused, his tone cautious. "There's something else, Camille. You've been appointed as the judge for a case involving those same officers next month." The irony hit her like a thunderbolt. Camille sank back in her seat, grappling with the news. She had spent weeks gearing up to confront these officers as a plaintiff, and now destiny had cast her in a role of judicial authority over them. For a fleeting moment, she questioned whether she could uphold the impartiality required to preside over their case. But then she reflected on the ordeal they had subjected her to, and the countless others relying on her to take a stand. This wasn't mere chance. It was a chance to demonstrate the true essence of justice. The courtroom hummed with subdued chatter as attendees settled into their seats. The matter at hand was routine, a disciplinary hearing for two officers accused of excessive force in a separate incident. For most, it was just another cog in the judicial machine. Officers Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, their uniforms crisp, projecting confidence. They murmured to each other, their faces betraying a casual inconvenience, as if this were just a minor inconvenience to shrug off. Then the door to the judge's chamber swung open, and a hush fell over the room. Camille strode to the bench, her judicial robe trailing gracefully behind her. She carried herself with quiet authority, her expression serene yet resolute. As she settled into her seat, her eyes briefly met those of the defendants. The effect was instantaneous. Carter's face paled, his eyes widening in disbelief. Daniel shifted in his chair, his jaw clenching as he tried to comprehend the sight before him. It was her, the woman they had demeaned and detained in the park. Camille paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to permeate the room. Then, with a clear and composed voice, she opened the session. "This court is now in session. Please take your seats." The officers sat rigidly, their earlier ease crumbling. Carter leaned toward their attorney, muttering something, but the lawyer merely nodded, keeping his attention fixed on Camille. For the first time in weeks, Camille felt a shift in power, yet she reminded herself that this wasn't about vengeance. Her role as a judge demanded objectivity, and she was determined to honor that duty. Still, the poetic twist of fate wasn't lost on her or anyone else present. As the lawyers delivered their opening statements, Camille listened with unwavering focus, jotting down notes. Occasionally her gaze drifted to the officers, noting the strain in their postures and the nervous twitching of their hands. During a break, Carter and Daniels retreated to the hallway, their voices hushed but tense. "How can she be the judge?" Carter snapped, his frustration barely contained. "This feels like a trap," Daniels grumbled, shaking his head. "It's not a trap," their attorney cut in sharply. "It's happenstance. Focus on the case. Your actions are what's on trial here." But the officers were too rattled to heed the advice, consumed by the surreal turn of events. When the hearing resumed, Camille maintained her poise, ensuring the proceedings moved forward with fairness and precision. Her mere presence, however, seemed to unnerve the defendants. Her son, exacting to return. Each time she spoke to them, they fidgeted, their bravado eroding bit by bit. During a witness's testimony, Camille noticed Carter glancing at her. His look wasn't one of defiance, but something akin to remorse, as if he was beginning to grasp the weight of their actions. By the day's end, the courtroom crackled with tension. Camille concluded the session, her gavel striking with a resounding thud. "We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., she declared. As the crowd dispersed, Camille remained at the bench, arranging her notes. She sensed the officers' lingering gazes as they hesitated near the exit, seemingly torn about whether to address her. Ultimately, they chose silence, departing with heavy steps, aware that their ordeal was far from over. The courtroom brimmed with anticipation the following morning. Word of the surprising turn of events had circulated, pulling in a larger audience than typical for a disciplinary hearing. Some attendees were driven by curiosity, while others came to stand behind Camille, though they understood her judicial role required strict neutrality. Camille entered with her characteristic poise, her black robe trailing elegantly as she climbed to the bench. The lawyers launched into their arguments without delay. The prosecutor presented a meticulous case, unveiling evidence and witness accounts tied to the officer's excessive force. "Your Honor," he declared, "the defendant's conduct was not a mere misstep. It was a flagrant misuse of authority, revealing a troubling pattern of contempt for the citizens they vowed to safeguard." Camille absorbed every detail, her pen moving steadily across her notebook. Her concentration remained steadfast even as the officers squirmed under her steady gaze. The defense counsel stood to respond, his voice deliberate but tinged with unease. "Your Honor, we concede the incident occurred, but we contend that external circumstances spiraled beyond the officer's command. There was no ill intent, and we argue this matter lacks the basis for severe penalties." As the debate unfolded, Camille couldn't help but notice echoes of her own ordeal, the rationalizations, the deflections. The similarities were striking, yet she set aside her personal sentiments, resolute in letting the evidence steer her judgment. The atmosphere grew taut during the witness examinations. The prosecutor summoned the victim, a young man named Ethan, to the stand. His voice quivered as he described the night the officers pinned him to the ground during a standard traffic stop. "They didn't let me say a word," Ethan recounted, his eyes flickering nervously between the lawyers and the officers. "It was like they'd already judged me guilty before I could speak." The prosecutor probed further. "Did you ever defy their instructions?" "No," Ethan answered with conviction. "I was terrified, but I followed every order. It didn't change anything. They'd made up their minds." A hush settled over the room as the defense attorney rose to question him. He attempted to undermine Ethan's account, but the young man stood firm. Camille observed closely, her face a mask of impartiality. Then came the pivotal moment. The defendants were called to testify. Officer Carter took the stand first, casting an anxious glance at Camille as he took the oath. His voice faltered as he fielded the prosecutor's questions. "Officer Carter," the prosecutor began, "you're accused of using excessive force in this incident. Can you describe what you did that night?" Carter paused, his eyes briefly darting to Daniels before he spoke. "I believed the situation was getting out of hand. I made a split-second decision." "And do you think your actions were warranted?" Carter shifted uncomfortably. "At the time I thought so, but now I see I could have acted differently." The prosecutor pressed harder. "Differently how? By not slamming an unarmed cooperative person to the ground?" Carter's mouth opened, but no response came. His silence was deafening. When Officer Daniels testified, his unease mirrored Carter's. His efforts to defend his actions only bolstered the prosecutor's case, exposing their reluctance to own their mistakes. Camille listened intently, her expression revealing nothing, though inwardly she grappled with a mix of exasperation and sympathy. These men held positions of power, yet they wielded it carelessly, leaving pain in their wake. As the day progressed, the evidence against the officers mounted overwhelmingly. The prosecutor's final argument was compelling, calling on the court to establish a clear stance against abuses of authority. The defense's closing remarks, by contrast, felt hollow, their points lacking substance. Even the officers appeared to accept the probable outcome. Their earlier confidence diminished. Camille concluded the session, her voice calm as she announced that her decision would be delivered the following week. As the courtroom cleared, Carter and Daniels lingered near the doorway, their faces ashen and strained. For the first time, they seemed to comprehend the full weight of their actions and the consequences looming ahead. Yet justice, Camille knew, wasn't solely about retribution. It was about fostering accountability, driving change, and ensuring past errors wouldn't be repeated. 7 days later, a profound silence enveloped the courtroom as Camille stepped forward to deliver her verdict. Every chair was occupied, the air thick with anticipation. Journalists crowded the rear, their pens ready to record each syllable. This case had transcended the two officers involved, evolving into a powerful emblem of the broader struggle for fairness and responsibility. Camille's voice, steady and resolute, cut through the stillness as she began. Law enforcement's duty is to shield and support the community with honor, dignity, and equity. When those vested with such authority misuse it, they undermine public confidence and inflict damage that ripples far beyond the immediate victim. This case has exposed the stark repercussions of such failures. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Officers Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, their heads lowered, the gravity of her words pressing down on them. The evidence has clearly shown that Officers Carter and Daniels employed unwarranted force, violating the standards they pledged to uphold. Their conduct was not only indefensible but reflective of a disturbing trend that demands correction. Camille detailed the penalties: unpaid suspension, mandatory participation in rigorous retraining, and a permanent mark on their disciplinary records. Her decision was stern yet balanced, blending accountability with a chance for redemption. With her ruling complete, Camille sealed the proceedings with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Court is adjourned." The officers rose, their faces etched with solemnity as they prepared to depart. Carter paused, turning toward Camille. "Your Honor," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm sorry." The words couldn't erase the harm done, but they marked a tentative first step. Camille gave a slight nod, acknowledging the apology without granting forgiveness. She knew real transformation required deeds, not just words. As the room cleared, Camille lingered at the bench, lost in thought. Justice had been upheld, yet the triumph carried a bittersweet edge. For every case resolved, countless others remained unheard, unresolved. That evening, Camille joined a gathering at a nearby community center. The space buzzed with voices, people eager to share their experiences, their grievances, their aspirations. Listening intently, Camille felt her sense of purpose reignited. After the meeting, an elderly woman approached, her voice quaking with feeling. "Thank you," she said, clasping Camille's hand firmly. "What you did in that courtroom, it means everything to us." Camille offered a warm, understated smile. "This is only the start. There's much more to be done." In the week that followed, productive dialogues unfolded among community organizers, police officials, and local advocates. Camille leveraged her influence to push for reforms, stressing the urgent need for openness and accountability in law enforcement. The case's impact radiated outward, not just in Fort Collins but across the state, as citizens began to call for systemic change, advocating for policies rooted in justice and equality. For Camille, this wasn't about personal retribution. Her mission was to spare others the ordeal she had faced. The pursuit of justice was a marathon, not a sprint. But moments like these reaffirmed that progress, however gradual, was within reach. One afternoon, standing on the courthouse steps, she watched a group of young activists assemble for a peaceful demonstration. A spark of optimism stirred within her. The system was flawed, but with enough collective will, it could be nudged toward fairness. That, she believed, was the justice worth striving for. Camille's journey teaches us a profound lesson. True justice isn't just about righting a single wrong. It's about standing up, speaking out, and pushing for change, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Her story reminds us that every voice matters, and every action counts. In our own lives, we can apply this by challenging unfairness wherever we see it, whether it's in our communities, workplaces, or daily interactions. It starts with courage, the courage to question, to listen, and to act, no matter how small the step. Camille didn't just fight for herself. She fought for everyone who's ever felt silenced or dismissed. So let's take that lesson to heart. Be the voice for someone who needs it, and never underestimate the ripple effect of your actions. Change is slow, but it's possible when we work together. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. If Camille's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and ignite change. Drop a comment below, tell us how you've stood up for justice or what this story means to you. Let's keep the conversation going and build a fairer world, one story at a time.